Dr. Nath graduated with an engineering degree at Cambridge University with a first-class honors. Then went on to do a PhD at London Business School in finance and had as a illustrious career in the UK, Hong Kong, and in India within the finance industry. More recently, Dr. Purnendu Nath, he's actually an avid scientist, and he's looking at kind of mentoring people on how to live a holistic lifestyle. Dr. Nath is a very, very deep thinker, and he basically takes a lot from the cultures and the different faiths which we have around us, to that extent that he's been fasting during Ramadan for the past 30 years. More recently, he's been intrigued with the Jain fasting. So without much further ado, it gives me great pleasure to invite Dr. Nath to come and talk to us and describe to us his experiences and his experiments with the truth. Welcome, Dr. Nath.
Thank you. Thank you. Good day, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for having me here, Rajiv. It's a sort of unique pleasure because it's the first time that, at least live, I have a predominantly Jain audience. In posterity, of course, it might reach out to a whole bunch of other people. And besides, thanks to you, I think I should, in some sense, thank everybody who's been responsible for me being here. So not just Jain friends and people I've mentored in the past, but many of the teachers and those who've kind of guided me along the journey without them sometimes knowing that they have. So as Rajiv mentioned, I like to describe myself as a scientist, and I think in some sense anybody could do that if they really wanted to, and it's a question of labeling. What I wanted to do today was, rather than blind everybody with a whole bunch of science, on graphs and data and research papers, etc., is to talk about how I think about all of this as with the sort of lens of a scientist, and not just from the perspective of, okay, what does fasting do to us, right, from a science research perspective. In fact, over the last 5 years, there's been an explosion in the number of videos, for instance, on YouTube on fasting, both sort of pop videos, people who have fasted and how they've done it, and the sort of scientists who work in that space who are typically in the West, and having seen the science that's they've been producing themselves, have incorporated fasting into their lives. So my own journey into fasting, and so what I want to do today in terms of a roadmap is sort of give some context as to, and background as to how I'm here, why I'm here, because anything I say, of course, needs to be taken in that context. We always need to know why someone is saying something, where they've come from, right? Whether it's a debate or an argument, or someone's very excited about something, we want to know the background. So I'll talk about that briefly, and then I'll talk about how, specifically to do with Paryushan, how I go through things. And I think coming to this idea of kind of context, one of the things that I want to make very clear is that today's talk is, my target is for people who've become very experienced at doing long or prolonged fasting. So Jains, who, many of you who might have been doing the Atai during Paryushan for many years, or have done it a couple of times and experienced it. And also perhaps at the other end, young Jains or perhaps older Jains who have thought about it, often thought that it's something that they probably won't be able to do, or it sounds uncomfortable and they don't want to do it. So looking at that sort of spectrum, and of course, non-Jains who are perhaps intrigued by fasting because they've, it's in the media quite a lot these days, and then they've sort of might have friends who are Jains and have suddenly discovered that Jains do prolonged fasting. So my own, as Rajiv mentioned, my own background with fasting actually started when I was at Cambridge almost 30 years ago. And it started off with curiosity. University is a time when you're curious, and this curiosity actually exists within each of us. Each of us has within us an innate desire to understand ourselves and to understand our place in this universe. Why are we here and what's the purpose of all of this? And I perhaps started it for those reasons, exploring as one does when one is at university, a whole bunch of different things. And I happened to be surrounded by a lot of Malaysian Muslims whom I really liked. I liked the way they conducted themselves. And that got me into this, also having learned a lot about Islam. That's what kind of got me into the idea of fasting. And in those days, it was more about going through this experience where you suddenly realize that, hey, human beings can do without food for many hours. So we are programmed to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but perhaps that's not necessary. And so we know that we come to this world alone and we leave alone. We come with nothing and we leave with nothing. And this understanding that along that journey, so if I'm here today, one of the things that I do whenever there's food in front of me, and I encourage all of you to do this because this is strongly grounded in facts and science. You have to look at food and drink and tell yourself, this is me, this is my body in the making, right? Because if I think about it, what I am here, what you can see of me, is a sum total over time of everything I've eaten or drunk or breathed in. And there couldn't be anything else that I've made of other than that. So that's one part. Then comes this whole idea of the dimension of time. Money is a human invention. It's a human creation. I won't go into the debate about whether God is a human invention, but money is a human invention. And in the modern world, we typically think of money and time as being equivalent, right? You call it compensation when you get a job because you have to be compensated for your time. But this dimension of time has always existed and will always exist. And so how does the dimension of time interact with what it is that we eat? So the timing of our meals. Now, when I started fasting 30 years ago, I didn't know much about fasting in terms of the science of fasting, because back then there was typically you had a knowledge gap. If you needed to know something, learn something, you had to go and buy a book or go to the library and get it. There was no World Wide Web to look up stuff. And even when the World Wide Web existed, there wasn't much material on this. So along with this, for myself, this experience of fasting and understanding that, yes, we can do without food and water for many hours at a time, and we can perform perfectly well, came over time, this understanding that as with anything that humans do, things get easier with time. So for those of you who've done the Atai, you'll know that the first time you did it, it was challenging perhaps. And perhaps some of you tried it and then weren't able to do it. But as time goes by, like with anything, we just get better at it. And again, this is grounded in science, right? If I have to run a marathon, I can't go and just head out there and run 26 miles or 42 kilometers. I have to gradually train for it. So there's science in that, right? It's a question of how you implement this science. If we step back and we ask ourselves again, well, you know what? What's the purpose of this? I'm generally fit and healthy. Why do I need to fast, right? Now, you can go off and look at you just have to Google benefits of fasting and you'll get research articles, scientific publications, and you also get videos to watch. So there's a body of information out there in terms of why it is that fasting might be beneficial to you. Now, this is where I kind of like to think of, sort of bring in philosophy and marry it with science. So, for me, philosophy is something that you do. It's not something that's theoretical. that you kind of study and give lectures on, but it's something that you should implement in your life. Now, if you go back many generations, we typically did what our elders told us to do. And this was the case not just in Asia, or in Africa, but in Europe too, right? There was generally, we looked up to our seniors and elders, those with experience. They were our natural teachers, and we just did what they asked us to do. In today's time, you can't just tell, never mind an adult, you can't tell a child, do this because I say so. They might do it occasionally because you're watching them, but the best way to get someone to do something is to explain logical reasons as to why they should do it. And of course, the best way to teach, as you know, is to lead by example. So for those of you who have children, you'll know that children don't do as you tell them to do, they do as they see you doing. So if we can marry this idea of today people needing a logical explanation, right? And again, this is logic, and perhaps logic might be thought of as part of philosophy and science and mathematics. But if you're going to marry this idea, firstly, that we want people to fast because they should see a logical reason as to why they should fast. And B, stepping back, and I think this is important, it's not spoken about much. So we have institutionalized religion. Perhaps in the world today, there's increasing separation of state and church, and society moves along, it's sort of in two dimensions. What has become very powerful around us, whether you're in London or I'm in Mumbai at the moment, or anywhere in the world, is that it's not countries and governments that control us, it's corporations, right? Society is effectively governed and controlled by them. The corporations, governments form and conduct society in such a way, or organize things so that society functions in some way that is preferred. But if each of us realizes that we have no real control over things that are outside us, right? You've probably often heard of this expression, change comes from within, and you can only control what you can do. You can't really make somebody else do what it is that you want them to do. So if we start looking inwards, right? We're constantly looking outwards. From the time we wake up, we pick up our phone, we might go through social media, then we rush off to work, and we're having to deal with things around us. But when we start to look within us, we realize that the only place that you can really make a change is with the things that you do. So now this is again logic, but this is when you start to begin to appreciate why you need science, because if you're going to do the things that are important for you, which is where you can really make a change for yourself, then it's important to understand the science, because the pressures coming in the opposite direction are significant. So if you think about the global momentum of wealth that's pushing your thoughts in a certain direction, whether it's to eat junk food, to consume junk on social media or television, there is this pressure that's going to constantly be there, perhaps not in your face all the time, it's very subtle often, but there is this pressure. So if you have clear scientific thinking in your way of approaching what it is that you do for yourself, you will be able to empower yourself, armor yourself in order to conduct your life in the best way possible. Now, you might say that, look, for example, I'm 30, I'm fit and healthy, and I've got a great life, I go on holiday. Why do I need to fast? And then it becomes very simple, because you've got to ask yourself, A, how is it that people are typically conducting themselves in the world? Most of us wake up and we go from A to B to C to D, or from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Now, that is, you can only progress through time in a certain direction. But we cannot be thinking that way. So people who are more religious or spiritual will typically think about the problem in a slightly, in a subtly different direction, but in a very important one. And in some sense, I do the same. So what I suggest that you do is, and this is again, it's logical and scientific. A simple thing, Google Maps does this. If you want to get to some place, you've got to figure out where it is you want to get to first, and then work out your route backwards. So for me, it was very simple. A few years ago, maybe about 5 years ago, where I thought, okay, what's my end goal really? Because when I was 35, 40 years old, I was like, okay, I want to live to 80. I guess that's normal. But it struck me, hang on, no, actually, I want to be, and today this is generally what I hold as my ultimate goal, is to be socially productive at 110. So what this does is this approach of thinking about your end goal and working backwards, which is something we typically don't do. Someone who's very religious will say, oh, I want to attain nirvana, or have, I don't want to get reincarnated in a certain form. I want to be in an elevated state. Others might say, I want to go to heaven, not to hell. But for me, personally, whether I think about the religious angle or not, for me, it's very simple. I want to be socially productive at 110. I sometimes joke and I say that I want to take Santara sometime between 110 and 115. And this is, I say it with, it's a sort of tongue in cheek, but basically to say that I have set my end goal to be socially productive at 110. Therefore, I have to work my path towards that, right? I can't say I'm 52 now and I want to retire at 60 and then have a great life, right? That's thinking forward. No, you live your life forward, no matter what it is you do and whatever your thinking is. But you've got to think your life backwards, sort of do the planning backwards, and then live it forwards. So, okay, where is this leading to? Why am I talking about this? I'm supposed to be talking about fasting. So this is where, for anybody who wants to have a long health span, i.e. a long life of good health, not a long lifespan on its own. No, there's no point having a stroke when you're 60 and then having a terrible life for the next 20 years, because modern science and technology will keep you alive for 20 years, but you won't enjoy that life. So if you're going to enjoy that life, you've got to ask yourself, what is it that allows us to have a long health span? And it's very simple, again, strongly grounded in science, from single-celled organisms to, if we consider humans to be at the top of the chain, we all benefit from what is called a hermetic stress, right? So basically a stress that is of the right magnitude, that your body, right from the cells to the tissues, to the organs, to the entire system, benefits as a result of the stress that you've given it. So just as a simple analogy, when you go to the gym, you stress your body, and say about 48 hours later, you're stronger, right? That sort of thing. Similarly, fasting is an absolutely amazing stressor. You already know that when you fast, you save time, because you are not spending time cooking, you're not spending time eating, you have more time to do other things. And it doesn't cost you anything compared to even a gym membership will cost you something. Medicines will cost you a lot, but not actually cure you. They will treat your symptoms. So there's sufficient scientific, logical justification for why you want to fast. So there's this question of how society is structured. There is the question of horizon, planning your life to have a long and healthy life. And then to understand that fasting is an extremely potent life protocol to have in order to get to those goals. No one has a goal saying, I want to be sick and unhealthy and have a torturous life when I'm older. Nobody says that, right? So the question is, if you're going to marry your goals with your actions, then it's almost, I would say, unwise, perhaps foolish is a strong word, but unwise to not consider fasting as to be part of your life. Now, and this is an important part of how to think about it. So, for instance, if you're Jain and you've done the attai a few times, you understand that it's not easy to do. But if I now think about a Jain who is curious as to how he can progress in a way to do the attai one day, then the benefits of, and sorry, I should caveat all of this saying that I wouldn't even classify myself as a beginner when it comes to Jain theology, but I'm sort of aware of this idea of ekashana, eating one meal a day, or Paryushan, eating 2 meals a day, or doing the atam, which is having a 3-day fast. The key thing is to progress gradually, right? Again, this is science being applied to the area of fasting. So, I started keeping track of my eating and fasting times just over 2,100 days ago. So you ask me on any day in the last 2,000 odd days, I can tell you what time I had my breakfast and what time I started fasting. Now, you might ask, what was the point of this? And this is where we come to this idea of the scientific methodology. So when someone thinks of a scientific methodology, or how should I think of being a scientist, it's very simple. So one of the things is we have hypotheses. This is how scientists work. And we then go and kind of get data. We check, does the data, when we take the data to the hypotheses or the hypothesis we have, does the data tell us a story that accepts or refutes this hypothesis, right? And so that's sort of one of the reasons that you might want to go off and collect a whole bunch of data. Now, a key thing is that whenever we run experiments on people, so if you look at published data on, say, fasting, they'll have, maybe say 300 people that they've written about in a published paper. But what matters is that you as an individual are going to vary. As you'll know, if you're Jain and you've seen people fast around you, no two people have the same experience. No two people have the same experience. They may be twins, but they will have different experiences. And again, this is logical. Twins have different experiences in just about everything. So of course, people who are not twins are going to have different experiences with something as relatively extreme as fasting. And the same is true for everything. I mean, never mind that our preferences are different. Even when you have twins, their preferences are different. So if you start to do two things as a scientist, one is to learn about the science in an easy way. So whether it's through YouTube videos or to learn more about what sort of you might call experienced practitioners of prolonged fasting within the Jain faith tell you about fasting, it's very important to also keep track of your own experience, because that what might technically be called your idiosyncratic experience, what is specific to you, will often be a large part of your experience through the whole thing. So there is what humans generally might experience, but then there's a component which is specific to you. And what you want to make sure is that you begin to understand yourself and your experience through this. Now, remember what we said at the end of the day, all of us have come alone and we'll die, our bodies will wither, and that's it. But I am not my body and I'm not my mind. You are not your body and you are not your mind, right? There is something else, right? For the last few hundred years, broad stream scientists, scientists, the mainstream scientists in the West have typically ignored this idea of a soul and consciousness. And today, this is being explored a lot more, typically in the West, typically in the United States, where there's a lot more money for funding certain research projects, etc. But never mind all of that. The point is, you want to begin to understand yourself a lot better, because there will come a point in time when you will be old and fragile, but that is at the physical level. At a non-physical level, a mental, emotional, and a spiritual level, there is no reason why you should wither away, right? And typically, and I've seen even fairly elderly, like I'm talking about people in the 70s, 80s, Jain people, maybe they're not practicing Jains, are upset that their lives are going into a state of decay because they're getting older and more fragile. And for me, it's very simple. No, you have to think of these dimensions separately. So we cannot tackle or touch the spiritual dimension other than through the physical. At least that's what I believe. And fasting, like a lot of the other stressors, is part of that armory of things that you can use in order to elevate yourself. And if you're going to track yourself over time, over years, decades, multiple decades, then it makes sense to start thinking of yourself as doing this in a scientific manner. And when we see scientific manner, as I said, you want to be systematic. And you don't have to have a degree in science to do this. I've experienced people who are medical doctors who don't work in a scientific manner. And that's understandable because people don't train to be scientists when they go to medical school. They train to be doctors, not scientists. And yet I've seen people who've not studied science at university, but maybe have studied things in finance or commerce or in the liberal arts, who are quite scientific in their approach and their methodology. So each of us as an individual can work in a way that's systematic and scientific. So this is something that I've been doing for many years. Like I said, so whether it's tracking my weight at the beginning and end of Ramadan over the last, so 20 something years, or tracking it on a daily basis for the last many thousands of days, and to be able to track some numbers like this over time. Now, you might step back and say, hang on, I want to be religious. I don't want to be a scientist. And all I'm saying is there is no reason to separate these two things out, because the best way to convince yourself that what you're doing makes sense is to not necessarily rely only on what others have told you to do, whether they be learned people in the past or some YouTube video. It makes sense to also keep track of your own experience. So you want to have this approach of being scientific and methodical over time. So, like if I start thinking about how I've experienced the four Paryushans over the last four Paryushans when I've done the Atai, I keep track of a whole bunch of things. So not just, for instance, my weight every morning, but also, to keep track of how much you've slept and how much you've slept relative to how much you would normally sleep. If I think about what it is that I do at a very practical level and the overlap between what I do and what you might call very religious Jains might do, then there is a significant overlap. So the key thing is that we're fasting, having only boiled water during daylight hours. And although practicing Jains might go to the Jain temple once a day or however often it is that they go, I don't go to the temple, but that's broadly probably the only way that we might differ. I might not pray Jain prayers, but my experience is I study every day, and perhaps I spend even more time studying because I have saved time because I'm not spending time preparing my meals and eating. So broadly, there's this strong overlap. And the key message that I want to say to people who perhaps are not Jains, and to my Jain brothers and sisters who are watching, is to understand that fasting belongs to nobody, right? The benefits of fasting accrue to those who do it. It doesn't matter what your family background is. It doesn't matter what religious faith your ancestors or your grandparents came from. What matters is what you do. The benefits of fasting accrue to those who do it. So sort of, again, understanding this is very logical. You cannot fast on behalf of someone else, just like you cannot exercise on behalf of someone else. Everything that we do has got to be because it brings immediate benefit to us. So when I think about my experience through this period, besides keeping track of the quantitative data, so your weight, the amount you've slept, in the UK where some of you are, it's not so easy to go and check a lot of your blood measures. You can probably check your blood glucose every day and your blood pressure, but often when I'm in India during the times of my prolonged fast, it's very easy for me to go and check my ketone levels, right? So those of you who are familiar with the sort of the science of fasting, you'll know that you'll have elevated ketones. Typically, you'll be able to spot them by the end of the second day, the third day of being in a prolonged fast. So for someone who can't do the atai, but say does the atam, or I think it's also called tela, right? If you do this, say twice during Paryushan, then you will find that you do enter a state of deep ketosis by this period of time. So it's not like, and it's never a competition with somebody else, right? If you've got to ask yourself, how am I benefiting? You will benefit from every little bit that you do. And I think this is a key thing to understand. And again, if I think about it as a scientist, typically, for most things that humans do, there's a sort of hockey stick effect or a J curve effect, or some might think of it as an optimal. If you think about, say, exercise, if you do almost close to zero exercise, you don't benefit. And if you push yourself just too hard, the trauma will be too much, that again, you won't benefit. So for someone who's quite sedentary, if they suddenly decide to go and walk 30 kilometers one day from being relatively sedentary, they're actually going to cause themselves more trauma and harm. So you want this hermetic stress to be there at the right level. What's beautiful about fasting, what's absolutely beautiful about fasting, is that the more you fast, or rather the longer you fast, the greater the benefits. So of course, there is again a cutoff point or a tipping point or an inflection point or a maxima or whatever it is you want to call it. But it doesn't happen for a long time after what typically humans might be able to do. So it's not so difficult to just go and walk 30 kilometers, right? You can get up any morning and do it if you want to do. But you wouldn't benefit from it if you've been sedentary. What's amazing about fasting is that you could fast for 8 days and benefit from it. Now, of course, what's sensible is to start off gradually. So now I just realized we're a month since Paryushan ended. And now we probably have another 10.5 months to the next Paryushan. But if you're thinking about doing the atai next year, and you've never done an atai, and you've perhaps been someone who's never fasted, then it makes sense to prepare and plan through the whole year, okay? And again, this comes back into this context of the time dimension, that I would not advise anyone to be of the type that says, you know what, I'm going to have a terrible lifestyle all year, and come Paryushan, I'm going to do the atai, and everything's going to be fine because I've done that. No, you will get benefits from it, and whatever be the sort of spiritual benefit that you think you might get, and things like that, or the mental strength that you might develop, or the emotional strength that you might develop, it would be wise to include fasting as part of your life through the year, so that when it comes to the time of Paryushan, you benefit from that and you are not in a state of stress and trauma. So I've heard of Jains who, don't fast for the year, and then come Paryushan, they'll try and do the attai, and they're sort of taking bed rest for large part of the 8 days. Now that's traumatic, right? You don't want to go through trauma just to put a tick mark there because someone else told you that you should do it, right? The motivation should come from within. So, very simple thing. My parents are Brahmin. For most of the 30 years of Ramadan fasting, I've not been surrounded by Muslims at all, right? Sometimes a whole month of fasting will go by and I won't meet a single Muslim. And the point is, it's all about the internal reflection and the journey that each of us does through this life. And it's the same with fasting. I don't fast during Ramadan because someone has asked me to. And I don't fast during Paryushan because someone has asked me to. I see the value in it. And I would strongly encourage you to do the same. So through the entire year is to take on fasting because it is something that you believe is good for you and to prepare your body for it. Now, what I mean by prepare your body for it, when you fast and you're someone who's experienced with fasting, your body's response to, say, even a 3-day fast is going to be very different than if you had no experience fasting, right? So 2 parallel universes. What you want to do is within your body, prepare the machinery. And by machinery, I mean literally at a cellular level, at a tissue and or an organ level. You want to prepare your body to be a body that handles fasting well. Because it is in those conditions that you will benefit from fasting in a way that gives you this hermetic response, a beneficial response, not a traumatic response. So not only will you have good health through the year, but also come Paryushan, you will have greater benefits from doing the attai. Now, someone might ask, but will I not get any benefits if I just do just the 3-day fast once a year? And for me, it's very simple. I've got 110 years to live, say another 60 something years, 70 years more to go. I see there will be many Paryushans coming up, but there's like 355 days between 2 Paryushans. How is my life going to be between those? We know, for instance, that just going to celebrate a religious festival once or twice a year is of only superficial value compared to having a practice which is daily and consistent through the year, right? So you want to build this consistency. You want to be someone who grows their internal machinery for things over time, because not only will you benefit from it as the years go by, but it will also be easier to do, right? So very simple. Looking at the time now, it's been about 24 hours since I last ate, right? I finished eating yesterday about 23 hours ago. And I ran this morning, I ran 10 kilometers. While I was running, just I was in my 10th kilometer, I crossed someone who said they were going to sign into and watch this webinar. Now, they won't be surprised to know that I ran this morning and I've been fasting. But the key thing is that it's easy for me to do this because my body's built this machinery and I can quantify it and I can see it because I've been collecting data. Now, does someone need to collect data on themselves? Like I said, there's benefits of doing it, but more than collecting data is doing, right? What collecting data does is it supports the doing, because you're then able to see what it is that you did. So for instance, it's a month now since Paryushan, but I already cannot remember quite how each day was over Paryushan this year. Never mind Paryushan last year and the year before and the year before. But I have this information. I can go back and check on any of the days, how much I slept, how many kilometers I walked, how many kilometers I ran, And so, by the way, so again, this is about hermetic stress. For someone like me who is used to fasting as part of their daily life, just fasting on its own is not enough. So again, perhaps one way that I differ from most Jains is during the Thai period, I will still go and run. I will still go and go do strength training, lift weights, etc. And it's not because I want to go and publish this on social media. I've never done that. But the point is, I'm telling you this now because what I understand is it's not that I want to tick off that I did the Atai. I do the Atai in order to get benefits from it. So if I want the benefits from it, then I need to make sure that my body is stressed out a little bit, right? And if only fasting is not enough of a stress, then perhaps I want to push it a little bit. And so that's why what I do is I tell myself, I'm also going to go and do a run. I'm also going to go and lift weights. And this sits back in the context of the bigger picture, right? Now, again, bigger picture, when we step back, we think about, look, it's not just me, it's all the people around me, and not just the people, but the animals and plants around me and the planet. So to step back, a simple thing I do is, and this is not just during Paryushan, but also during Ramadan, is what I do is I try to absolutely minimize using motorized transport. So for instance, for my partner on the effectively the 9th day, I had to go to someone's house that was hosting me, to which another family sent my partner food. Now, I specifically made this journey because I didn't want someone to deliver food to me because that would involve increasing fossil fuel usage. So it was very simple. So this walk, I had to walk, take a train, and then walk again. So in just getting to my breakfast meal at the end of 9 days, I had to walk 5,000 steps, climb about 25, 30 floors, taking the train. When I reached the apartment building, when I had to eat, I had to climb nine stories. I didn't use the elevator. I could have, right? But I thought to myself, like I typically tend to do, and this is through the year, is every little bit I do has an impact on me, and it has an impact on the planet. Now, how do I minimize the negative impact on the planet? And perhaps by minimizing the negative impact on the planet, I even optimize and maximize the benefits to me. So think about this. This is about being appropriately selfish and appropriately greedy in a way that's good for you and for the planet, right? And this is important because when we think about greed, we typically think about external wealth, right? Everything that we do when people talk about greed and wealth and working and making money, etc., it's typically focused on external wealth. And for me, it's very simple. It's not like external wealth isn't important. It's important, but it's clearly not the most important thing. What matters is internal wealth. So how do I go through life increasing my internal wealth, right? And this is absolutely key to how I live my life and how it is that all the people around the world that I mentor, Jains, non-Jains, the non-Jains from various sort of cultural and ethnic backgrounds and religious backgrounds, is this very key focus on internal wealth and growing your internal wealth. Understanding that external wealth is important, but it's not the most important thing. Unfortunately, in today's times, our focus is primarily on external wealth. And by understanding the science of your body and your mind better, you will begin to naturally focus more and more on your internal wealth, which actually over time, if it interests you, could increase your external wealth so much more. Because typically we have this mismatch. People don't focus on their internal wealth and taking good care of their health, as a result of which, by the time they've made enough external wealth, they cannot go out there and enjoy it because they need a wheelchair to travel, or they can't eat here and they can't eat there, they can't go here and they can't go there. So what we need to do is focus on our internal wealth generation while being mindful and attentive about our external wealth, but not giving it so much importance. And what's key is to understand that fasting is free in terms of money. And what's beautiful is it gets you true currency. So money is external currency, right? Dollars, pounds, rupees, they're external currency. But time is internal currency. It's the only thing that each of us has the same, whether you're, the richest man on this planet or the poorest man on the planet, you only have 24 hours in the day. How are you going to maximize the use of that currency? And fasting is absolutely central to that, right? You can go and exercise. You can eat what people might call superfoods, if such a thing exists. But what's absolutely key is to ensure that you bring fasting into your life and you start off small. And this is what's, like if I had to kind of close with a final message to all of you, given that we're going to run out of time soon, it would be just this: start off small, right? There's no reason to try and run a marathon tomorrow. Start off small. Don't have to talk about it to the rest of the world. Do your own journey, internal journey, by observing yourself, keeping track of what you're doing. It might seem tedious at first to keep track of when you're eating and when you're fasting, but over time, like with anything, right? It's no fun brushing your teeth, but you get used to it and then you don't think about it, you just do it. Similarly, keeping track of this will only take you a few seconds, but over time you will have collected information about yourself that will make your journey for fasting a lot easier. And then you can say to yourself, you know what, I've got data about myself, just like a scientist would, and I'm able to understand how it is I perform. And it just doesn't have to be just quantitative data like the time you ate and your weight and things like that. It could be qualitative about how you feel about your life, right? If you already know that journaling, keeping a diary is of great benefit. But if you do this in conjunction with your fasting, then you will get additional benefits from it, because you'll be able to understand how the fasting is able to benefit you in terms of not just your physical, but your mental and emotional health. And then, God willing, your spiritual health too. So that's sort of my kind of final, closing message before I take any questions that you might have. So Rajiv, if you're there, then I'll pass it back to you so that we don't run out of time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nath. That was a fascinating talk. You covered many scientific aspects and also your own internal journey and experience. I would really like to open the floor for the next 10 minutes or so. If anyone has got any questions, we would be more than happy to post them. Are you able to unmute yourself? If anyone has got any questions, please feel free. Whilst we are waiting for questions, Purnendu, one thing I wanted to ask you was that you mentioned a lot about logic, but when you talk about fasts, what do you think about people's faith taking them through rather than the logic? So many people, in my own experience, it's actually the internal faith which seems to be much more over-empowering than actual logically thinking.
So I definitely think faith is very real, right? It's knowing that, and this faith could be faith is in a concept and an idea, right? So one might have a concept of an idea of a soul and wanting one's soul to get elevated and believing that a fasting will do it, right? So there's absolutely no harm in that. There's benefit in that. We also know that you could have faith in science. So for me, it's always been having faith in the science, because then I can see the published data out there and it's commonly understood. But for sure, having faith in something that you know is beyond you is important, right? And this is an absolutely key part of being a scientist, is to have what we call having a scout mindset, not a soldier mindset, to constantly tell yourself, you know what, I could be wrong, right? There's so much I don't know, and I don't know what I don't know. And given that I perhaps know more now than I did a year ago, than I did 10 years ago, let me extrapolate that to believing that what I've been told by wise people before me, maybe hundreds or thousands of years before me, is something that I have to just take on the basis of faith, and that I have to, if I do what I was told to do, then it will be good for me. So even that faith is great. Whether you believe in soul or God or reincarnation and all of those things, having faith is important. And we see this around us all the time, right? Like, a very simple thing. You're in England soon after Bannister ran the 4-minute mile. Like, people didn't think it was possible. Within weeks, many people ran the 4-minute mile, right? It's just believing you can do something will make a big difference, right? And perhaps for people who like to follow the science, because in today's day and age, youngsters especially want to know the logical reason why. They won't do something just because their father or their grandmother told them to do it.
Great, thank you very much. I think you're unable to unmute yourself. So I think Minesh Shah has got a question. Minesh, would you like to unmute yourself? I believe. Are people finding a problem they can't unmute? Because I've actually... Okay, one of the questions is from...
So I can
Nick,
see some questions pop up.
Yeah, the question's coming up. So Nita Shet is asking, what's the difference between religious and spiritual fasting? Do you see any difference between religious and spiritual fasting?
So what's the difference between being religious and being spiritual, right? They're sort of, in some sense, two different dimensions. You could be spiritual but not be religious. So when I think of being religious, I think of somebody telling you that they know, and what they're telling you is the right thing, and you should follow it because there is a God, or there's this idea of soul, and you should do it. Spiritual is this thing, this idea of constantly seeking, right? There is this idea that there is a soul and there's a sort of spirit. I'm seeking, I'm going through life in this journey, right? When I started off starting to question, it was just like everybody questions. What happens today, unfortunately, is because we're so focused on the outside world, we're not looking within us to ask, what am I about? Where am I come from? We've got so many layers built on top of us, whether it's attachments like family, friends, socializing, jobs, business, society, media, etc. There's layers and layers and layers, and we're just so bombarded with that we're not looking at what's closest to us, which is inside us. And that, in some sense, is a spiritual journey, right? You might use religion to become more sort of spiritual, or you might just say, you know what, there's so much I don't know, and I can experience the beauty of watching a sunset and feel elevated without understanding that God told me that he made the sun and it's beautiful and I should watch it, right? There's sort of this experience which is very real, right? And that's why I say that you could know the logic and the science behind things, but experience and going through things in an experiential manner is what will allow you to get the most benefit out of things, right? And we can see this in just society around us, the number of if you like, medical doctors who are unfit and unhealthy, right? There's so many of them, right? So having theoretical knowledge is one thing, but practicing your life in a way that's going to be good for you is another. So
that's great. Thank you very much. I think Niksha, you got a question. If you can just ask your questions to Dr. Nath.
Hi, Purnendu. Lovely, lovely talk. Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, I've never, I like yourself, I've been fasting for quite a few years, I've done the Atai. I am a practicing Jain, but I love the scientific idea that you've given me a new approach of how to do it. Reflecting back on your diary, as you say, of the scientific data, I just want to see if I can share some of those experiences, you can share some of your experiences of what actually happens to you. As you mentioned, you're able to continue doing all the things that you normally do, with strength training and all of that, along with doing the Atai and the 8 day. Just share a little bit and any changes you experienced during those 8 days.
So I've had the benefit of doing what's dry fasting during Ramadan for 30 years. So, one of the things that, so I was asked to come and speak literally just about 4 days ago, I think 4 or 5 days ago. And the first thought was, okay, if I'm being asked to speak with my scientist hat on, I should, put up a lot of graphs and data, etc. And then I realized that actually, hang on, this is not going to be so useful to everybody else because it's not about all the things that I did in my experience. But what I can tell you is that this, and as a Jain and being surrounded by so many people who fast, you'll know that there's a lot of individual variation in this. What I can tell you is that just about everybody experiences this, whether they do it during Paryushan or at any other time, that the first day is not so easy. The second day is quite rough. For someone who's experienced at fasting through the year, the third day becomes a lot easier. For people who are not so experienced, the third day is still quite tough. And it's from the fourth day onwards that things become really easy. The fourth day onwards, you feel like you just don't need to eat. You could go for you could go for days and weeks and months without eating. And that's because you're deep into ketosis and your body has adjusted and adapted to the new regime. So like, for instance, say like this year during Paryushan, I noticed that in the first couple of days, I was sleeping so much more than I normally do. But by the 5th and 6th day, I was sleeping a lot less, right? There's a lot of these mental changes that happen. So, one's desire for food, if you're, again, this is at an individual level, I have no specific craving to eat a lot of food. By the 3rd and 4th day, if I ever have a fleeting desire for food, it's never for sweet food, which is quite unusual because you would normally think if your glucose levels are naturally low and you have ketone production that you would want to have sweet food. But for me, the cravings have typically been for spicy food. And perhaps that's because there's less salt in the body and the brain's automatically creating these triggers for wanting to eat salty and spicy food because your brain associates spicy food with salty food as well. So there's sort of, those experiences when it comes to hunger, one's desire for sex reduces significantly. And this is sort of one of the reasons that we're sort of prescribed fasting if you're someone who perhaps has, if you're religious but thinks about sex a lot, then you probably should be fasting quite a lot to kind of work on that. There's a natural drop in libido. What I experienced, what's interesting this year is that I normally listen to music through the day as I work. The type of music I listen to changes based on my mood and also where it is I want to take my mood. And what was interesting is through this Paryushan, I had no interest in listening to music, which I found extremely surprising. I was shocked by it because I don't remember experiencing this in previous years. And I'm starting to think about the fact that I didn't keep track of it in previous years. So perhaps I didn't have any change from the sense of music experiences and wanting to listen to music. And so one of the questions that I put up myself is, what made me do 4 attais? Right? Why didn't I just stop at the first one? Because doing a tie isn't easy, right? It's not easy. I don't care what anyone says. Doing a tie is not easy. What made me come back and do it a second time, a third time, and a fourth time? And I think one of the reasons was this whole idea is that each time we go through something, our experience is different, right? When you go on holiday to the same place, each time you go on holiday to that place, your experience is different. So similarly, I wanted to see what the variation was from one Paryushan to the next. I think, and I think it's important to say this because it's not impossible that I don't do the attai next year. And I'll tell you why. So, I don't know if you can tell, but from this video, but my body fat levels are extremely low. So by the end, through this period of Paryushan this year, my own estimate of the total fat in my body was that I had just over 1 kilo of fat in my body. All forms of fat, visceral fat, subcutaneous fat. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing for me. So I try to maintain muscle mass by doing strength training through the 9 days. It's a lot, the intensity and the volume is a lot less than non-Paryushan time. But it's not impossible that if I don't hit a critical threshold of body mass before Paryushan next year, that I might actually decide not to do it, right? So remember, the whole point of doing anything is to get benefits from it. And with anything that's stressful and for so many days, there's benefits, but there's also some potential cost and things like that. And so that's one reason that I might not do it next year. And I'm not suggesting to other people that they should use that as an excuse not to do it. When I'm getting close to only just about 1 kilo of fat in my entire body, that's the time when I tell myself, look, maybe you don't want to be doing this because it could potentially be harmful to you. And one key thing, and this is something to take away from science, the research that's been published, is that we typically get a significant part of the benefits of a prolonged fast by sometime between the 4th and the 5th day of a prolonged fast. So you won't get it if you do the atam, but sometime between the 4th and the 5th day. So if you do a 5-day fast, you're likely to get what's a pure and a full immune system reset, right? So we know that you have greater stem cell production, your organs have regenerated. So you're, between a week before Paryushan and a week after Paryushan, your biological age has gone down significantly, right? So I'm effectively younger than I was 2 months ago or 3 months ago from a biological age perspective. And it's important for us to get this right, a balance between the two. And that's at an individual level. I think for the bulk of the population, this is not a concern. But just in terms of sort of full disclosure, I should tell you that this is something that I did think about this year. It's not something I thought about in previous years because my body mass was slightly higher. And so I've always been at single-digit body fat percentage for the last maybe 6, 7 years, and or maybe 8, 9 years. So what I wanted to say is that when you come down to becoming really, really, really low in your total body fat, you want to be thinking twice about doing 200 and I think this it was about 210 hours of fasting, right? You want to do it, but you want to not do 210 hours. Perhaps you want to do the atam, and you want to have the meal and then do have another 3 days of fasting after that. So therefore it's important to collect data because you begin to understand your own journey through this, right? I'm not going to give someone else advice based on my experience. I'm going to tell them to collect information. And then let's say the people I mentor, so there were Jains who are fasting through this period, is to look at their individual data. So if they can access blood tests, then go and get your ketone levels tested at the end of your atam and check, are you in ketosis or not? Right. So there's sort of all of that.
Thank you.
Thanks. I've been doing the atam for the last 3 or 4 years. And I was a bit disappointed to know that there's not a complete reset with this. But anyway, my question is, you suggested that we should be doing some fasting throughout the year. Would you be able to recommend how we should be fasting, how often and for how long? And what are the scientific health benefits to this? And also, what does Jainism say as to what is the most auspicious time to fast through the year?
Okay, so Manish, I mentioned this at the start. So I'm not Jain by family background. And I mentioned that my understanding of Jain theology is very, very, very primitive. I won't even call myself a beginner. So I won't speak about Jain prescriptions for fasting. I know there's these ideas of doing Porsi and other things. What we know is that humans have naturally fasted for most of human evolution and human history. And it's only in the last 12,000 years that we've been having periods for most of our history over the last 10 or 12,000 years since humans became agricultural, that started doing agriculture, that we've not needed to go for days without food. So fasting and going without food for multiple days is normal for human beings. There are tribes in the Amazon that still go without food for 2 or 3 days. And they know that they don't need to eat regularly because they have body fat, right? So there's no need to do that. When it comes to benefits of fasting, so if you've got the time access here and you've got benefits, again, I mentioned that the benefits keep going up the longer that you fast. It's not like you fast for a day and then if you fast for 2 days, benefits go down. No, that's the beauty of fasting, is that even within a day, when you fast for 15 hours, and then you're fasting for the 16th hour, the benefit you get from that is actually less than when you fast from the 16th to the 17th hour. You do not get marginal diminishing returns at that stage. You actually continue to get more. And again, this is science, right? This is where, so people who are not Jains but are fasting, people I mentor, I'll tell them that, look, do you understand? You just push your fasting even for another half an hour and you'll benefit more. If you're trying to lose your body fat because you're overweight, you're obese, you've got health problems, just even, never mind half an hour, even 15 minutes, you can delay your breakfast for a little bit longer, you will benefit from it. So, depending on, I almost never give individual specific advice unless it's someone I mentor, because it's extremely detailed and I need to know everything about that person. But what I tell you, Minesh, is that definitely look to do some kind of fasting through the year, whether it's daily fasting, 5-2 fasting or whatever it is, or fasting as per Jain protocols. I strongly recommend is that you pick something and you do it, because doing something is better than not doing it. Then you have to decide whether you want to not do anything that's non-Jain because you're a Jain, and all of those attachments is something that at an individual level you do. I try to get the best out of every possible culture and subculture out there. So it's the reason that I that's how I operate.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nath.
Dr. Nath, thank you very much for your very interesting talk. I had a kind of almost philosophical question. How much importance do you give to self-experience versus following a religious practice?
So let's think about, what happened, what is religion, right? The way I see it is it's a way to get people to work. Humans are social creatures. So we work best when we are working as a group, not as individuals, right? So you don't want to be going out there living on your own on a remote island, because that's not how humans are naturally programmed and evolved to be. Humans have evolved to be in society and communities working together. Now, if humans are going to do things together, it makes sense to have a set of rules, right? So the way I see it is institutionalized religion exists because we want to have a set of rules so that everybody does things in a certain way. So whether it's Muslims fasting 5 times a day and fasting at specific times, or Jains coming together at a certain time of the year to celebrate a festival, that's the reason that these rules exist. But at the end of the day, it's always an individual experience. I will never know, for instance, what anybody else experiences with anything else. So like we say Rajiv does an atam, will have no idea what his experience is, no matter how he describes it. And similarly, when I describe how I went through certain things and how I felt about certain things, it's theoretical. Your own experience will be what will matter. And this is the whole idea of consciousness, that everything only exists because of our sense of sort of being conscious of certain things, right? Nothing exists outside that. So we've got to experience things to really understand, right? Otherwise it's theoretical, and it's and that's not the way I think that you've got to have a beautiful merging of theory and practice at all times. So I'm an engineer and scientist in sort of everything that I do. Otherwise you're like an economist, right? You're terrible at making predictions about anything, right? Whether it's inflation going high at the moment, it's you want to be doing things at a practical level along with the theory.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good afternoon. It was very interesting talk. The thing is, I was just wondering why there is a difference between Ramadan fast and a Jain fast. And another question I want to put on is that, have you been able to go beyond mind while fasting?
Beyond the mind? Okay. So I have a draft paper I've been working on, which is sort of looks at fasting across faiths, and in some sense, what I think is good or bad about certain aspects of fasting across different faiths. So I think the reason that, and this is my guess, the reason that Muslims will fast during the day is because, given where the faith arose, it's typically much hotter in the day and the stress is a lot more. And therefore, it made sense to say, keep walking through the day as you normally might, but don't drink any water and don't eat any food. And then soon after sunset, have a simple meal, pray, etc., and then wake up early in the morning and then start your fast again. With Jains, it's the other way around. If I had to choose, and to from the perspective of pure science, I would say that the way that Jains typically live their lives, right? How we're meant to live our lives. We're supposed to finish eating all our meals before sunset, and to not again eat until well after sunrise. I think from a scientific perspective, that's probably more justified than eating after sunset.
Yes. That's what we believe, that after sunset, your digestive system is not working, it's only repairing. So
correct. And this is from a perspective of evolution.
Yes, I never
right?
understood Ramadan fasting because they eat a lot after the sunset, and to us, scientifically looking at it, it is not more beneficial. So,
so it's probably important to clarify a point, and without hopefully no one will take this the wrong way, because I mean this with full sincerity, given that I've been fasting for the last 30 years during Ramadan. What would have happened at the time of Prophet Muhammad is that they would have had a very simple meal soon after sunset, and that's it, and then wake up in the morning and have a very simple breakfast. It is not how Muslims typically will conduct themselves over. I'm shocked. I went to one of the top hospitals here in Mumbai, a talk given by Muslim doctors saying very proudly how they put on weight during Ramadan. And they were doctors who were trying to give advice on diabetes. And I was shocked. I was like, this is your chance to tell your audience that you can use fasting to heal your diabetes.
yes.
To treat it. But you know what? In fact, I stood up in the audience and asked a question, and I asked them. They were apologetic, but they quickly brushed it aside because they would probably stop getting sponsorship from pharmaceutical companies. Told people that they should stop having their diabetes drugs and they should fast, right? So this is important. We know that our insulin response is very different between 8 a.m. in the morning and 8 p.m. at night, right? You want to have, even if you're going to have a laddu, you're better off having the laddu at 8 a.m. than at 8 p.m., right? The insulin response is going to be very different. So, leaving aside faith and a label of being Muslim or Jain or Christian, from a pure science angle, and this is what's sort of excited me more and more over the last few years, getting closer and closer to a lot more Jains, both in terms of people I mentor and old friends, and connecting about this and understanding the science. And what matters and what's important and what's beautiful is the way that the Jains have been conducting themselves and the things they've been prescribing. Now, the population of Jains is very small. It's the most ascetic of religions. It's the toughest of all religions to follow if you're going to follow it properly, right? And perhaps that's something that attracts me to the practices, because by nature, I'm someone who appreciates the benefit of self-denial, right? To deny myself food, to deny myself water. I do practices where I deny myself air, I deny myself oxygen, right? Believing that there is some benefit of that. So perhaps that this is what I think is amazing. And this is the reason why, even though people may talk about the blue zones, Okinawa, Ikara, Loma Linda in California, places where people live beyond 100 years of age, there are so many elderly Jain people who have crossed 100 and are in good health, right? They're not researched, etc., because they're just doing their own thing, whether they live in Gujarat or Rajasthan or wherever they might be. They're just living their simple life. They're 100, 203 years old. They have no health problems, right? Yeah. And it's because they followed these lifestyle practices and protocols that wise people before them had prescribed for a long and healthy life. And remember, it's important to have that and. long and healthy, not just long, because you can have
Yes.
long with just taking medication, but it won't be healthy and fun.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So one more little question. Does the geography matters in terms of fasting, how it is related, where you are in the world, according to the climate?
So I'll tell you something. What's happened over most of man's history, large populations did move in big ways. It might have happened where, say, Alexander the Great moved through Asia and came to Kashmir and then went back towards Egypt. Maybe that happened over a few years. But typically, large populations didn't make these moves in ways. What's happened over the last 150, 200 years is that people from all over the place have moved all over the place. The Japanese have moved to Hawaii. Indians have moved to the US, North America, to Europe. Indians moved to East Africa at one point in the 19th century, and then to the UK from Uganda and East Africa, etc. Now, what's happened is because we moved away from where it is our natural place to be, given how our bodies have evolved, has led to a whole bunch of health problems. So, very simple thing. Okay, the simplest thing is to tell you, because it's been in the news quite a lot, vitamin D, right? It's going to be even lower for, if you live in, I can tell from the burglar alarm or whatever at the corner of your room that you're in the UK. So the fact, your vitamin D levels are going to be so much lower than if you lived in Ahmedabad or Vadodara or somewhere else, right? So that's going to have an impact. Vitamin D is extremely important for good health, right? So in that sense, it's going to matter. And these are sort of little things, but over time, they add up to a lot. And
Yes.
I trained as an engineer, but today I work more on the human body and protocols to have a long and healthy life. So every day there must be at least 50 things I do that most of the population doesn't do. And they're very, very little things. They don't take up time. But it's with this whole idea that I'm going to be in my truest, most natural state, right? Which means that I need to make sure I get the sun, right? There's a reason that Indians today living in India are vitamin D deficient, right? So geography matters, but also economic development. If our economic development means that we're still living in India, but we never see the sun,
Yes.
right? Then that's also not a good thing. Whereas you could be brown skinned living in the UK, but you make sure that your vitamin D levels are appropriate, because in the summer, you make sure you get the sun, and in the winter, you take some vitamin D supplement. If it's possible to get it vegan, then you get it or not. But it's important to go into the sciences because of that, to understand that I don't see a mismatch between science and religion or faith and practices, because religion has come about for the betterment of humankind. And science has come about for the betterment of humankind. It's only when they try to interfere and get in each other's way and push for power and wealth and all of that we have a problem. But otherwise, I don't see a conflict.
Thank you.
Thank you very
so
much, Dr. Nath. I think, thank you very much, Dr. Nath. That was a very stimulating, very interesting talk. We truly appreciate the time you've taken to talk to JVP London.